Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new week here at USA Global TV. And hello to our friends listening on Business Talk Radio. This is our show that I love so much because of my co-host, who is actually a personal friend, and she is my personal and business coach. This show is Leadership of the Heart. And today we're going to explore communication styles and their impact on team members. So before we do that, let's welcome Mariska from where? New Zealand. Yes, joining us. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
And I'm, as always, so happy to be here.
Happy Tuesday to you. Happy Monday to me and to all of our friends wherever they are in the world joining us.
Yes, indeed. We have a very global community forming, and it's getting bigger by the day.
Absolutely. And Mariska, I want to let our viewers know about something that you and I have been working on, and also our team member, Caroline Heward, the elevated listening community, because we're talking about listening today. And our viewers, our listeners have an opportunity to join our community by going over to drjacalyn.com. And as soon as they get there, they'll be prompted to join. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I'm going to spotlight you. And for people who are joining us for the first time, because after all, this is only our third episode of this show, will you please give some information about your background and why it's important for you, for people to know about heart-centric leadership?
So my background is in engineering as well as in leadership. So I spent quite some time within the managerial fields. And of course, I then moved over to coaching. And now I'm helping leaders that's either moving from a specialization into a leadership or wanting to go further in their leadership to actually be able to do that. And one of the reasons why heart-centric leadership is so important is bringing that human element into the workforce. So there's so much research that's been done, and even with the stuff that we've been going through in the past years, we have found that being a leader from the heart makes a big difference to our teams and to our organizations. So this is a key element, I think, for us to be able to bring to our workforce and to our communities.
Thank you so much, Mariska. And I just wanted to spotlight the fact that you are one of our expert presenters on Talking Heads as well, so our audience can get to know you better on those shows. Can you share a little bit about that and what you share in your presentations as a Talking Head expert?
Yes, of course. So I'm also on the Talking Head show, and that is normally on a Wednesday Eastern and on a Thursday for New Zealand, seeing as we are a little bit in the future. And on our Talking Head shows, currently we are looking at awareness and the role that awareness plays for leaders. We also did a series of 6 where we looked at communication and the different ways that we actually communicate, and even bringing in elements that we might not think of, such as color and images, that we also communicating through those different elements. So those are some of the shows that you can go and already watch on our YouTube channel. So it's USA Global TV. If you search that on YouTube, you can surely get those shows. And we would love to hear any of your feedback.
Thank you so much, Mariska. I appreciate that. So today we're talking about the importance of heart-centric leadership and what's important to know. And as I talked about at the beginning of the show, we're going to discuss communication. And I know
Mhm.
someone has contacted you with a question. So please share with us, who is that person and what do they want to know?
Okay, so Josh contacted me and he lives in Singapore. So Josh wanted to know. He said, I am starting to flex my leadership muscles and I am working with my team. The one problem that I have though is when communicating with my team, I normally first listen to hear whether I can help them with the solution. And as soon as I get the solution, I stop listening. What can I do to help me to actually actively listen until the end and determine whether this person wants a solution or not?
Bravo. Thank you so much for posing this question. You know, I love this because one of my areas of expertise is in teaching people how to listen at an elevated level. So,
Mhm.
Josh, you are not alone there. This is something that is very common. Many people listen to provide a solution. And as Josh said, you know, kudos to him that he realizes that he's shutting off, he's shutting down because he's just waiting to provide the solution. And that's something that's very common in business. It's also very common with a certain gender. And I think the fact that Josh realizes that he's one step closer to being able to manage this and to find a different way. So, as we know, in order to break an ineffective pattern of behavior,
Mhm.
we have to replace it with something that is effective. And you know, Mariska, as in addition to being a co host and a talking head, as an elevated listener, you know that in order
Mhm.
to listen at a higher level, you have to provide a safe space for someone, which means that
Yes.
you are fully present. You're not thinking about
Mhm.
anything else. So, Josh, and I know you're probably sleeping out there in Singapore, but we hope you watch this tomorrow. You wake up. Once you realize that you're going into solution mode, that's a great time to take a deep breath, pause, and focus on what the other person is saying. Let everything else go. And that's not something that's easy, is it, Mariska?
No, it's definitely not something that's easy, and it's something that needs to be trained. So all of these type of things is a little bit like our muscles, right? So we
Yeah.
don't go to the gym just once and then we have Popeye sort of muscles going. We need to do it continuously in order for us to build the muscles that we want. And that's the same with listening. The more we do it, the easier it becomes. But initially, when we just start out, we might still find our mind wandering. So, Jacqueline, I was wondering, especially during those initial stages, it sounds fairly easy to go, okay, I'm going to breathe in and listen. And then, not two breaths further, I find myself maybe wandering again. What would you say would be a good way for us to keep ourselves in that attention space?
That's a great question, Mariska. And I think what I'm going to say also aligns with meditation, mindfulness, and being present. There are so many distractions in the world, and we're so used to doing things the way that we're used to doing them. So, in this case with Josh, this is what Josh is used to doing because maybe in a personal situation, someone wanted solutions. Maybe that's how Josh was brought up or what Josh observed. So now it's a matter of taking all that and undoing it so that he can be fully present. So, with mindfulness and meditation, not everyone's going to do this, obviously, but what we learn is to focus on the breath. And in this case, what I'm suggesting is not only focusing on the breath, but focusing on the other person without any judgment. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we might be with other people and we could think, this is so boring. I already know this. Can we just get to the part that I want to hear? Can we just, it's almost like watching a movie. Who did it? Can we just fast forward to that? But no, that's the whole point of going on the journey. So first acknowledging, which is what Josh has done. Second is being open to doing something differently. And what that means is when you're in the team meeting or you're with your peers or colleagues, you're not doing anything else. So the devices, the mobile devices, no, we're putting them aside. Thinking about what's going to happen in an hour, forget it. What happened yesterday, lose it. Just take that time, whatever it is, because time is precious. Just take that time with that person or persons and just be there. Now, when you start to think about coming up with a solution, immediately you can say to yourself, they didn't ask for the solution. I'm not going to give a solution. And now I've checked out. I've got to check back in. And you may have to keep doing that. You may have to keep stepping up and reminding yourself, because something else we've learned as elevated listeners is that we still have to come back to what we've learned, because we're likely to go backwards to the way that we used to do it because we've been doing it for so long.
Yes. And that is so interesting, just noticing all the different ways that we bring our attention back to the conversation. So being aware of our breath and what's going on around us, those devices. Oh, those devices. the bane of our existence, we most probably don't even know it.
Yes.
So all those different elements, and I love it. So what I'm wondering is, when I'm going into a conversation, is there a way to almost set my environment up in order to help me succeed? Because it sounds like there might be, but I'm not sure whether this would always be possible. So what would you suggest?
I think that's another really fabulous question. I think it is possible to set up your environment for successful listening. And something that I want to predicate that on is we cannot always be listening at an elevated level, because we've got a lot of stuff to do. We've got places to be and deadlines and family members and self-care. So what I'm suggesting is, when you're in a situation where it really requires you to be fully present, make yourself successful by setting up your environment. What does that look like? Put the device away, turn the device off, turn the device over, whatever it happens to be. Look at the person, look them in the eyes, turn your body towards them. That's something that I see in business. A lot of times people are talking to the back of a head, or they're talking sideways to someone. No, turn and look at that person and just listen to what they're saying and think to yourself, I'm present, I'm present, I'm present. That's it. Just be fully present. So with the environment, it's also important that if it's something that really needs to be discussed in a one-on-one, that you take that time and you set it up in a one-on-one environment. If you're in a group and somebody really wants to have that kind of conversation with you, set up a time to make that happen. You know what, Mariska? We're in this group setting right now. What you're saying is really important, and I want to have this conversation. How about if we meet for 10 minutes after this meeting is over? How would that work for you?
Wow, yes, that is really powerful. That's really powerful, because how many times have you had a conversation in a group, or you've seen even a group that has a conversation, and it's almost like there's two people that might, it feels like they're blocking everybody else out. And it might be that that part of the conversation wasn't had. They didn't say, hey guys, or step away from the group, or arranged a different time for them just catching up on their own and discussing the thing that needs to be discussed.
Exactly. And Mariska, when you talk about environment, something that I started noticing many years ago is, you know, when we were going out and doing a lot of things, which I know people are, I must be the only one who's not, but if you were sitting at a table and it's called a four top, it's for four people, and then someone brings a chair, now there's five of you. That fifth person typically is not involved in the conversation. There's sort of, it's not set up so that everyone has equal opportunity just by how they're seated. And I've always been very aware of that. Or if you go to a wedding or some kind of function and someone doesn't show up and there's one person facing an empty seat, that person really has no one to listen to them. They're not part of the conversation. So I do think your environment is really important, whether it's a social setting or whether it's a professional setting, because the truth is we all want to feel like we're heard.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do.
And we remember people who make us feel that way, don't we?
We do. I mean, just thinking about conversations that I've had where I might have been speaking to the back of a person's head, which normally I try not to do that. But some occasions, right, the person might be busy on their computer, and they're so busy, they acknowledge you by saying, yes, I'm listening, and yet they're continuing on the computer. So to me, it almost feels like, yeah, you might be listening, but for the conversation that I want to have at the moment, you're not listening enough. So also being aware of what amount of listening is required for the conversation to be a worthwhile conversation to be had. Do you have any tips or tricks in that regard?
Yes, I definitely do. And as I mentioned, we can't always be fully present. So we might have something really important to discuss. You want to, barge into your boss's office or your peers over to their cube, or you're on the phone with them and you just go right into it. Well, they're probably not available at that exact second because they were probably doing something before you either picked up the phone or you came into the office or whatever the case is. So I always suggest asking for permission. Steve, I'm looking at the back of your head and I see you're working on your computer. I had something that happened today and I'd really like to discuss it with you. Would you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to speak with me now? No, I don't. I'm actually working on this project. Could I speak with you whenever it is? And then you set up something else. Or you could come around in front of the person. They're at their computer, right? Hello, see me over here? I'm wondering if you have a few minutes to chat with me right now. But something that always gets me is the phone, especially in business. I had to do a lot of cold calling. You pick up the phone and you call a person. And I remember I started out selling the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was a big paper in Philadelphia. And my job was to get as many Sunday editions sold because they were thicker and they were, more money. And I would just go down the list, dial one number after another. And yeah, the person on the other line, yeah, they can't wait to speak to me, right? Because they have nothing else to do but talk to me. No, that's ridiculous. And we do that all the time. We think because we pick up the phone and call someone at that exact moment that somebody has time for us and we should just blurt out whatever it is. So what I suggest is, let's say it's a phone call. You pick up the phone, you answer the phone. Hi, Mariska. How are you today? Blah, blah, blah. I'm calling because I want to share something with you. It's going to take about 7 minutes. Is now a good time for you to speak with me?
7 minutes? Yeah, we should be fine. I have a meeting on the hour, so 7 minutes should give us enough time. Or I might have said, no, I actually have a meeting in 5 minutes, so I'm a bit short on time.
Perfect. Both answers are perfect. Now, if you commit to the 7 minutes, can I go 10? Can I go 15? Can I go 20?
Well, you did ask only for 7.
And what's going to happen if I go 20? How are you going to feel?
Quite a bit frustrated and irritated in all likelihood.
So the next time I call, maybe you won't answer the phone, or maybe you won't respect the fact that I'm going to keep my word about 7 minutes.
Yes. And it might also make me wonder whether you'll keep your word on other things, because you did say 7 minutes.
It's exactly right. Bingo. But what happens? We get into this story and we're so excited that something good happens, something bad happens, something's going to happen. And we just can't stop ourselves. We just go on and on and on. Now, you on the other end, you promised 7 minutes and you have a meeting. What do you do?
Well, I will have to stop you. So if we're getting close to where I need to prepare for my next meeting, I'll have to say, hi, JACALYN. It was lovely speaking to you. Unfortunately, we've had our 7 minutes and I need to go. So at the moment, that's basically time for me.
But I'm in a crisis right now. I need more time. I can't let you go. I don't know who to talk to.
Well, that would make it a little bit trickier, right?
But it's the crisis. Is it really a crisis, or am I in desperate need to speak to someone? Because if it was a crisis, I would have told you at the onset, hey, this is what happened, right? Instead of waiting the 7 minutes and then, because now I'm kind of desperate that I need someone. So you have every right to stand up for yourself and set your boundary, and I have to deal with it.
That's correct. And in some cases, I mean, communication is one of those things where there's agreements, there's boundary setting, there's so many different elements in it. And knowing from personal experience, at times, and it depends on the type of plea, it can be really tricky to almost shut the other person down in order to go and do your own work, because you care about them, or you care about whatever it is that you've been discussing at that point in time. So that sort of brings me to the next question. What would be a good way to almost help the person transition into the end of the conversation, going, well, this is now the end and we need to move on to the next thing?
Here's what I would suggest. Set the expectation from the beginning. So I call you, you answer the phone. Now I'm you. JACALYN, I'm happy to give you that 7 minutes because it sounds like this is something you need. When we get to 30 seconds out, I'm going to have to give you that 30-second warning that you're going to have to wind down, or a minute wind down. And then I have a hard stop. Okay. So if you're in agreement with that, let's go for the 7 minutes. I'm setting my timer, and I'm fully present, but I'm setting a timer, and that's fine. You can set a timer.
Wonderful way of actually keeping both parties not only on time, but accountable for what they're doing and how they are communicating throughout that process, right? Because 7 minutes might seem like a long time, but it goes by really fast.
It sure does. And something that I see doing this work, it's actually sort of like a curse, because the fact that I teach these courses, I'm very cognizant of people's behavior, even my own behavior. But I can see when someone is ready, if there's 3 of us or 4 of us on the stage, someone has just had a thought pop into their head and they cannot wait to jump in as soon as the person speaking stops. And it might not even be in alignment with what's being discussed, but they have to share this comment because it's so important. And little things that people do with their body that you can just see. I know immediately that person is no longer listening. So I think that's something that we have to be aware of. We are all sparked or triggered with memories or things that come up for us. But that doesn't mean that that's the exact moment for you to share that if you are an elevated listener. Now, if you're in a social situation, there's a bunch of people standing around, everyone's just, hey, I did this for the weekend, you did that, that's different, because that's not elevated listening. That's just socializing and networking, which I still don't think is a great way to communicate, but that's something that I feel. So Mariska, I'm going to come back to you. Let's say you're my boss and you're in your office and I'm down the hall, and a customer just called. There's a problem, and the customer is irate and they want to speak to my boss. So I come down to your office, the door's closed, I knock on the door, I just come in. Now you're on the phone with someone. What are you going to feel now that I've barged into your office? But there's, you don't know, but there's an angry customer. And the moral of the story is I didn't address the customer's needs properly. So now I'm handing them over to you. So you don't know any of this, but you're on the phone and I barge in. What do you think?
Well, my door is normally closed for a reason. Knocking and coming in without being invited already sort of feels like there's a boundary that has been stepped over, so to speak. So I might already feel a little bit annoyed at that point.
Now, what I don't know is that you're talking to your boss. So I continue into your office. And while you're on the phone talking to your boss, who's my boss's boss, I now proceed to tell you that there's an irate customer who's on the line who wants to speak to you. Now, how are you feeling that I just shared this information without an invitation?
Ooh, yes, that would definitely lead to conversations separate to the one that I need to have with a customer, I'm thinking.
Yeah, pack your bags. No.
Well, there's definitely going to be some behavioral conversation going on after this.
Definitely, definitely. So you see how things can spiral out of control. And once again, just because something happened to me at that moment doesn't mean that another person is responsible for showing up and listening to what I have to say. I have to ask for permission. The permission has to be granted. And then I have to stick to whatever commitment that I made to get your attention as an elevated listener.
Yes. And this is, I'm thinking through this scenario. And say, for instance, I was on the phone with the boss and the conversation was around performance, right? And something like that happens. It already places me in a bad light too, because how am I actually communicating within my department if I have stuff like that happening? And I mean, it does happen sometimes if there is a really big emergency, but there's ways of dealing with those very big emergencies, right? So yes, having a clear way of communicating that everybody understands. I recall actually while I was back in South Africa working at the power utility, that one of the things that came up for us for communication a lot was we used to communicate on some of the social apps. I think we used WhatsApp at that stage. And there was a lot of people that would communicate from very, very early. So they might start already at 5 o'clock in the morning and they would communicate as late as 11. And you always sort of felt that you needed to respond to it until we actually set the boundaries as a group to say, okay, so anything that comes in before 7 o'clock, you don't have to worry about responding to it, but after 7, please respond. And then anything as late as 6 o'clock, you can still respond to that, but after that, it's family time and you don't have to worry about those, so you can check up on those the next morning. And that was quite useful for all of us because now all of us knew how we needed to communicate. So I think in this example that we just had, JACALYN, that would be the same sort of communication that might be useful for the whole team and not only the one person that barged in while the other one was on the phone with the boss.
I love that. That's brilliant because now everyone's on the same page and is in alignment. And I think that also helps create an environment, a culture where people feel wanted and heard and appreciated.
Yes. And because we can all agree on the same thing, we all knew what the expectations are. And it just makes it so much easier then to communicate. Because communication is not only about putting our message out, it's also about receiving messages. And that's something that's very interesting that you mentioned a little bit earlier on about people coming on the show and you can see that they want to say something and react to what someone else said. And I was wondering if I'm the speaker. So I'm not listening, I'm actually speaking. What should I look out for to see whether somebody is still actively listening to me or not? Because sometimes we don't notice those either.
As a speaker, yes, that's a
Mm-hmm.
good question. I think that the tip offs for me, you'll see someone go, they're about to move their mouth, right? Or they're moving forward in some way, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
they put the finger up, like I have, or a hand or something.
Yeah.
I've seen that so many times, even in classes that I've taken, that there's someone speaking and someone raises their hand, but it's been discussed in the beginning that all questions will be answered afterwards. People just can't help themselves. When you are being listened to and people are fully present, you'll notice that you can take a breath and no one's jumping in. You could actually
Yes.
take a breath and then continue on, and nobody tried to hijack the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very valid one to sort of understand whether we have maybe taken more than our social allotment of time when sharing, especially when sharing in a group. Because I have found that sometimes we find that only one person is doing most of the sharing, or it's a conversation almost only between two people, and the rest of the group, there might be 5 or 6 people in the group. The rest of the people are just almost standing by and not really interacting in the conversation. And this might be because someone is hogging the conversation.
I remember when I was in corporate, there were various times, there was always the team meeting on a Monday or
Mm-hmm.
whenever it was. And the same people would hog the conversation. And basically, what happens is you just check out because you feel like I felt like nobody cares what I have to say. Why am I even in this meeting? Because they only care about what these two people have to say. And fortunately, someone came on board, a new leader, and decided that each sales meeting we were going to go around the team and everyone was going to share, and that made it feel much more inclusive.
Yes. And that's something that is very apparent, I think, coming from an engineering background. I've seen that especially with engineers that has a tendency to be a little bit more introverted. So normally when it's one-on-one, sharing information, not a problem whatsoever. As soon as you have a group setting, introverts has a tendency to want to shut down because they don't want to have the spotlight on them. And then, especially in team meetings like that, if you don't have a structure where everybody can share equally, they won't share. They'll be either happy to just check out or just look from the sidelines what's happening and then keep all their brilliant thoughts for themselves, which is actually not helping the whole conversation. So if you are a leader and you have a couple of introverts in your team, other than going around the table, what would be other ways that might be useful for team leaders to help those individuals to also share in their meetings?
I think one thing people can do is they can write down what their share would be. And we
Mm-hmm.
could ask each person if they can write down how they feel about XYZ. Then we'll collect all these things, we'll read them aloud, and then we'll ask people to elaborate if they wish to. So that's something that I've actually been involved with in group dynamics and worked really well because that helps get a person out of their shell. And
Yes.
what I found is the people who are usually the very quietest, the ones who are just into themselves, are actually filled with great ideas. They have great things to
Yes.
share, but they don't feel that it's a safe environment to share. It's also
Mm-hmm.
a good idea to do one-on-one meetings with the person and let
Mm-hmm.
them know that you want to hear from them, and how would they feel if they ran the beginning of the next meeting, or assign a topic for the person to research and then have them present it at the next meeting.
Wow, those are all wonderful ideas. I can just imagine that the inclusion that that person will actually feel would be a lot higher. And hence, the engagement that they feel would be a lot higher. I mean, as you mentioned earlier on, we all want to be heard. We all want to be listened to. Even the people that don't necessarily jump up and down and dance on the tables to get attention, right?
Absolutely. Now, there's also another situation, one that we deal with here on this television platform, just like any other television channel. We have a certain amount of time. And
Mm-hmm.
even though, as the producer, I will brief people before the show starts that this is the show flow and we have to finish at this time, that doesn't mean that once someone gets on a roll, they remember about the time constraints. And then I am put in a position running the platform where I have to cut the person off at a certain time because we have to close out because there's another show. And it is an awkward feeling because I don't ever want to cut someone off when they're sharing
Mm-hmm.
something. But at the same time, there was an agreement. There was an agreement
Yes.
made. And just like we talked about with the phone call.
Yes. And I think, especially these days, with the different virtual sort of spaces that we collaborate and brainstorm and utilize within our workspaces and in our communities, it's really important to keep that in mind when we are the ones doing the speaking, right? We did agree on a certain time period or time frame. And I mean, whatever it is that we do now that we run over, it means that it impacts the next slot or the next person or the next meeting. Um, and that might not be ideal if there is something that we wanted to share and we were not able to. We have basically a couple of choices. We can either come back or we can share it in writing. So we can write an email or a little bit of a piece. Maybe after a show, do a little bit of extra piece on what we wanted to share extra. So there's a variety of different ways that we can keep sharing, but also stay within the time that we were allowed to have at that point. Is there
Yes.
any other communication things that you've seen come up, especially having this platform and so many wonderful shows with so many wonderful people coming up, that you've noticed as human beings, we have a tendency to do these things more or not at all?
Yes. So a couple of things, and thanks for asking that. Before I had this platform, I was on another channel. And as the channel grew bigger and bigger, there were new rules put in place. But at one point, there was a big stop. It was not a stop clock, but it was a timer. And when it got to 30 minutes, the show literally was shut down. That was it. Like you could be in the middle of a sentence, it was over. And it seemed kind of harsh, but it really taught you to stay on time. And if you've ever been to an in-person conference and I sold meetings and events for years. So there's a certain format and agenda that everybody
Mhm.
has to stick to. Well, if the first speaker goes over, then every single thing after that is off for the rest of the day. And as someone sitting in the audience, you look and think, oh my gosh, okay, lunch is late. Now we're going to have to stay late. Dinner's good. And it just, now people are angry and they're not as much engaged as they were before. So it is really important to stay on time. I think part of what happens when it comes to television or radio,
Mhm.
just in my experience, some people don't like it at all, but other people, it's sort of like an addiction. And you get on there, and it's just like, wow, this is really cool. And people want to keep going and going. And I'll say to people, this is not a monologue. This is a conversation between three people. And to your point earlier, we've been in situations where we're standing there with the group or we're sitting at the table
Mhm.
in the conference room and we're just sitting there. We're not involved in the conversation. It's not a good place. People don't feel wanted or welcomed, and then they start to check out, and you lose somebody who, might be a major contributor to your team, organization, program, whatever it is.
Yeah. And the same as with the introverts, right? They might have really great ideas that you are now missing out on because you didn't even pay that person any attention to start off with.
Yes, I agree. And I think on a subsequent show, we should also talk about when it comes to communication, in that example I gave with the irate customer, how to diffuse an irate customer, or how to bring the level of communication down so that you can actually get to the heart of the problem. I know last night, a Sunday night, I had to call about my website, and I had to speak to the first person and go through the whole authentication process. Then they switched me to the second person. By the time I got to the third person, I could feel it brewing. But I knew that this third person, it wasn't going to be fair to them for me to take my frustrations out. So what I did was I said to the person, I said, Joan, I'm just going to let you know, just hear me out for 1 second. I am really worked up right now because I have this issue. I spoke to Bob, I spoke to Betty. Now I'm speaking to you, and I'm annoyed, but I'm not annoyed at you because I know that you genuinely want to help me. And then all of a sudden, now I got it out, and now she's listening. She understands. And now I'm listening. I let go of it. And now we have two people working to resolve the issue, and it worked out quite nicely.
And that is a very neat trick that you actually employed there. So from a brain perspective and an emotional intelligence perspective, naming the emotion makes a big difference because it helps our amygdala to disengage. So what happens when we're feeling the frustration, it's almost like having your hand on a hot plate. And as long as your hand is on the hot plate, your hand's going to be burning. And as long as your hand's burning, the only thing that you are thinking about is your hand burning. As soon as you take it off and it's not burning anymore, you can actually start thinking of other things. And our emotions are exactly the same thing. So having that frustration sort of building up and building up, you can feel it building up, but you've never named it. Until you name it and say, I am feeling frustrated, it's more the situation that's making me frustrated than the person in front of me, then you're disengaging that, and you're also helping the other person, because our emotions are contagious, to disengage for themselves too. Because when I come into a situation where I'm frustrated, the other person automatically feels the frustration. They might not know what they're feeling at that point, but as soon as I name it, and as soon as I say, hey, I'm feeling frustrated, that person can also go, oh, okay, so that's what's going on. Great, let's see how we can resolve this issue. And that's what happened with you, which is wonderful.
I totally appreciate that. How many times have we heard someone say, how are you feeling? I don't really know how I'm feeling right now. Well, if you can't share how you're feeling, how are we going to diffuse it? How are we going to acknowledge it? How are we going to accept it so that we can figure out a plan forward?
Yeah. Or we get asked, so how are you feeling? And the person would just respond with, okay, or not too bad. It doesn't really give me what you are feeling. Are you feeling great? Is it a wonderful day? Or did something happen? And if something did happen, you don't need to take over the whole conversation discussing it. At least just name it, because it helps you to have a better discussion once you are in that discussion, instead of having that thing sort of as baggage being dragged along with you.
Yes. What comes to mind is, this is my favorite. How are you feeling? Fine. Fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Great, you're fine.
Yes.
There is no information in fine. So I have to say to myself, depending on the situation, okay, how hard do I want to work at this to find out how they're really feeling? So I might say, okay, I wanted to talk to you about XYZ. Or I might say, can you share a little bit more? What else is there besides fine? Well, I'm
Mhm.
actually not doing too great today. Aha, now we're getting somewhere. But you said you were fine. And people will just say that so that there's no door open. You cannot come through. It's just here's the door, here's the wall, stay back.
Yeah. Yes. And you can actually see on their facial expressions. I mean, they could have even said that they're good, right? But if they say it in such a way where you can feel and see physically on their facial expressions, they're not good. Automatically, our brain goes into, okay, so what the hell's going on with this? Because what the person is saying and the other feedback that I'm getting is not the same. So it makes us wonder. And it's, as you said, it depends on how much we want to dig. And if we really want a good conversation, that digging will most probably be part of it, right?
Yes, yes. And I want to address something else before we close out. Someone said to me not that long ago when we were talking about communication that if I didn't want to speak to you, if I didn't have time, I wouldn't answer the phone. And I actually don't agree with that. And I'll give an example. A little while ago, someone called on the phone. I saw the person's name, they were in my phone, and I didn't have a lot of time. But I wanted to acknowledge the person for calling because how many times do calls come, they go to voicemail and then we'll get to them or WhatsApp or whatever it is. I want this person to know you're important. And I never got to say, I only have 10 minutes. So the person went down a rabbit hole on and on and on and on. And several times I attempted to interrupt, which always feels difficult.
Yeah.
But at one point, I had to say, hey, hey, hey. I did. I said, hey, I'm really sorry, but I have to go at this moment. I had to go like 15 minutes ago, but I have to go. Oh, but I'm really sorry. Can we set up a call for possibly tomorrow? Well, no, I'm going to be out of town for a few days. And I said, okay. So my point is this. When you pick up the phone, to me, it says that you have respect for me. I have respect for you. But don't take advantage of it by not saying, is this a good time? I always say this. Is this a good time for you to speak with me? And when people say no, I respect that because I don't want to go on in any way when someone has something else that they need to be doing. So I think it's respectful to pick up the phone, acknowledge the other person. I see that you're calling. I'm happy to hear your voice, but this isn't a good time.
I agree. And I do know that there is times when we physically cannot pick up the phone because we are in a conversation or a meeting, and that's fine. Being able to acknowledge the phone call at least as soon as we can after it happened also goes to that same point, I think.
I agree with you. And I think it also goes to the point that you made earlier. When that person calls again, I'm going to have to seriously consider whether I'm going to pick up the phone without saying immediately, I'm really glad to hear from you again. I'm just letting you know that right now I have a window of 15 minutes. Now, if the person goes beyond, then it comes to a point where I have to look at what is the scenario because we all have things that we have to do. And it becomes credibility. It becomes a trust issue. And I think that we have to be aware ourselves and each and every one of us when we're engaging with someone. Are we respectful of other people's time as well as our own?
Yes. And that is very important. I think we don't always take into consideration the honor that we are giving the other person and ourselves in honoring the time that we have. It's almost like we take it for granted that there's a lot of it, although time is one of those very valuable resources that we only have a certain amount each day, and it is about how we're using it. And connecting is a great way to using it, but being purposeful around how we connect and doing it in the time that is appropriate.
Hallelujah to that. Well, it's been a great show. I'm glad that we had this conversation. And thank you to Josh in Singapore for posing the initial question. I want to let folks know that they can join the Elevated Listening community. Just go over to my other website, which is drjacalyn.com. Everything and anything that has to do with listening courses, coaching, it's all over there. Mariska, I'm going to spotlight you again, and your Talking Head segment is coming up on Wednesday. So please do go over to our YouTube channel. If you're there now, USA Global TV, just click subscribe. We would love that. And you'll see everything's organized in playlists, and you can find Mariska's episodes there in Talking Heads. How can people get in touch with you, Mariska?
So the easiest way to get in touch with me would be via email. So my email is mariska@journey2discover.com. Or alternatively, you can also connect with me via LinkedIn. So I would love to hear from you guys. And if you have any wisdoms around leadership and how you have experienced leadership from the heart, we would love to have you on the show.
Yes. And how can people get on the show? They can go over to our website. What is it?
usaglobaltv.com, as far as I remember.
Yes, it is. You just go to book your session, and all of the shows are there, and you'll see this show, Leadership of the Heart. You can go ahead and sign up there. All right. We are going to say goodbye for now, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We will be back with our first show, which is the Mallorca Connection, which is going to be a lot of fun, Mariska, because our team member, Roland Friedel, is hitting the road. Literally, he's going to be in his RV driving around the world and broadcasting from all of his different travel stops. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Ooh, that sounds like so much fun. We can live vicariously through him on his travels.
He is someone who has a very independent lifestyle, and he's got his website is rolandfriedel.com, and under there he's got something called Wireless Life Rocks. So if you're interested in learning how to live from wherever you want in a wireless life, Roland is the guy who can help you, and he'll be here tomorrow for the Mallorca Connection and also for his Talking Heads.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Yay!
Absolutely. All right, we're going to close out with a couple of clips, and I wish everybody a beautiful evening, a beautiful morning, a beautiful afternoon. We'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.
Take a moment.
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 So I've had the privilege of photographing some incredible people over the years, and during each shoot I've asked the subject to close their eyes and take themselves to a peaceful place just for a few seconds. I've found that this really helps to refresh the energy between the camera and the subject. They had an energy that was quite special and quite different from the rest of the shoot. The collection grew, and now it feels the right time to use it for something good. I think it'd be amazing if we could help to raise awareness and involve people in the discussion about mental health. So what we're asking to do is for everyone to upload their own self-portraits. All of these portraits will become part of a massive artwork. I'm really excited to see this project go from hundreds of pictures to thousands of pictures. Essentially, an ever-evolving artwork that says we're all in this together.
Close your eyes and take a moment.